In this video, I would like to show you how you create a simple service for a joiner process. So if a new colleague joins the company, it can automatically create the Active Directory account, and it can also create tasks, for example, for the Human Resources department. I'm logged into the server with administrative rights in our demo environment, that is the user Vincent Valentine. And I can now open our console from the desktop. First step is we need to create a so-called configuration item, or CI, where the service catalog stores anything that's entered into the form. So when you open the service or order the service, you get a form, and the data stored in there needs a CI. So we go to administration, go to schema, configuration items, and here we have this button which will guide us through the creation of the configuration item. Internal name, we simply type joiner. So it will automatically put a UD here, which means user defined. This is the display name. We will create a simple configuration item, which will automatically add some prerequisites. And then we go to data definitions. And in here, we add the so-called service form base data definition, which is required for the form for our service. We also want to create a new data definition where the form data is stored in. So the name could be joiner and then DD for data definition. Display name is automatically created. I will simply remove the D here. And we click on create configuration item. Okay, we can close it here. We do not want to automatically build the user interface. We'll do this later manually. And let's check what happens. So in the configuration items, we should now have a new CI called joiner or UD joiner. And we also have a data definition, which is called joiner DD. We click here and click on edit. And then we check the attributes. So that's the fields we can use in the form. By default, we have a name here, which we can use for the last name of the new employee. And we also need a field for the first name. So let's call this first name. Display name is automatically created. We can keep the defaults here. Of course, we can also add additional fields if required, like job role, manager, whatever. Clicking on done, it will create the new field. And now we need to go to security and make sure that everybody can write to this new configuration item. So I get everyone. Click on it. Click on settings. And then I search for my new configuration item by typing join. Here we go. So let's do read, write, create, and delete, and click on set permissions. Now we need the form that will be displayed when ordering a service, and for this we go to user interface layouts dialogs, click on add dialog. Name will be joiner form, for example, and the configuration item is joiner. So it will automatically read all the information from this configuration item, including the fields we just created. So now we can simply click here and drag and drop our first and last name to the form. Input control will be text box, so we can also enter data. And this is the second field, name, which is our last name, like this. Okay, after configuring the form, we can click here to save and publish the form. And we also need to set rights on the form, so we can click on set audience, and we select unrestricted. We could also assign individual roles, but this should be available for all users, so we can also say it's unrestricted. Now we start with the workflow that will be running when somebody orders the service. So for this, we go to Services and Processes and run our Workflow Studio. We will create a new workflow, and we will use a template, which we modify. It's this template here, create task. So I click here, click on create. And the name of our workflow will be joiner workflow. Workflow. So this create task workflow simply creates 3 different tasks. So if it's an installation process, it will create an install task. For repair, it will create a repair task, and for uninstall, of course, the uninstallation task. So we do not need repair. I will delete it here. We will focus on install first. Later on, you can also add an uninstall workflow or process here, but we will simply ignore this. We will mainly work with the install. And let's see what we have here. The first element or action here is the get order data, which will automatically pull information from the database on the order. What we need here is the so-called service booking form, which is a link to the database table where the form data has been added. And when we click here, it will give us a so-called expression object ID, which will be stored in this variable get order data. This icon here reads some information regarding the service, so we can use the name of the service that has been booked and the owner, the name of the owner of the service, and which is nice. We don't really need it, but we need the data from the forms. So we add another activity here. This one, get single record data. I drag and drop it here, and I add it to the workflow like this. And then it goes back here to the switch, which decides if it's install or uninstall. Now we need some parameters here, so we will read data from the data definition we created, which is joiner. And now we need to find the one line in this table, which is linked to the service booking we're currently working on. So if you do 3 different orders, there will be 3 lines in there, and we need exactly this one line we're currently dealing with. So I click on, first of all, I click on where expression to find the correct line. And I click on expression object ID, which is the expression object ID of the order, which will now be matched against the variable we created earlier here in this order data. To do this, you must do a double click here and then click on this icon. And this is the variable we just created containing the expression object ID. Okay, so now we get the exact data record we need. And then we click on Add to assign the variables or the data from the database to our internal workflow variables. So first of all, we click first name and say we want to create a new variable for it. So that is first name, and click on OK. Now we got this matching here, and then we take name, and our internal workflow name should be last name, like this. So we got first name and last name, and now we can use those values in our workflow. So first of all, we will use this task to create a job for HR to add the user to the HR system. So let's see what we want to modify. We need a description. So this could be something like, please add new user. Then we refer to the variables we just created, first name, last name, to HR system. We also need a summary. That's like the subject of the email. Add user to HR system. You can also use variables if you like here. For example, last name. And finally, we need a responsible role or user. By default, it's configured for user. I want to clear that and assign it to the whole HR team. So I select responsible role, and then I go to human resources. Okay, that's it for this task, I guess. And it should also automatically create the Active Directory account. And we will do this with a little PowerShell script. So I search for PowerShell here. Invoke PowerShell. Let's move this a little so we can drag and drop it somewhere. Like this. So I want to link those two actions here, and then continues like this. Before we run PowerShell, we need to create a so-called Windows account name. So that would be the login name of the user. And for this, we need to create an activity called assign, which assigns a new value to a variable. So I'm searching for assign, drag and drop this right here. And I want to add the first and last name to this variable. First of all, I need to create a variable, which would be win account name. So that's our new variable. So this is the target variable, win account name. Missing C, oops. Like this, now the red icon is gone when everything is okay. And here we put in a calculation of the value. So that would be first name. And now we put in a substring O, 1, which means we only want the first name with the first letter of the first name. And then we add the full last name like this. And yeah, so that's okay. No red icon, so we can proceed here. Now we need a PowerShell script which creates the Active Directory user. I will copy and paste this in here to avoid any typos and explain what it does. So first of all, this section up here simply reads the variables from the workflow. So that's like parameters passed on to the PowerShell script. Here, it creates a password. It's got to be encrypted, so that's why we need to do this convert to secure string. The password is matrix42. And then finally, we have a new AD user command, which needs some parameters. So that's the SAM account name, which comes from here, which we just created with the assign command. Then we have the last name, we have the path, so the OU where the user will be created. This is the password we defined here, and finally the account will also be enabled. There are many more parameters here. You can search for new AD user on Google to get more parameters you can add here. In our demo system, we already imported the so-called Active Directory module, which will provide this new AD user command. If you're using another environment, it could be necessary to import this module on the server where the workflow is running. And sometimes it could also be necessary to import the service manager and add a Windows feature to enable this. Also keep in mind that this workflow is executed with the account configured at the service. So if you search for the Matrix 42 services here, we have a user account right here. So this user should also be enabled to create Active Directory accounts. So back to our workflow. This is the script. When I click on OK, it will automatically add the parameters here to the properties. So first name, last name, win account name are right here, but they have no link to the internal workflow variables yet. So I need to type it here. Same again, make sure there's no red icon here, so no typos. This is last name. And finally, we have the win account name. Okay. Workflow looks good. No red dots here, so everything is okay. So I can click on save, check in, and do a release and publish of the workflow. Now I got everything to create the service, so I can go back to my console here, go to Service Catalog, click on Service Portfolio, and create or add a new service. This will be my joiner service, and status should be operational. And we can also add an optional approval. So if somebody else needs to agree with this new joiner, you can add an approval workflow here. But for now, I will just leave it blank. And then we go to portal display. You can also add a nice picture here if you like, a little description like new employee process. Okay, we can also add a portal category. For example, services security. And what is mandatory is the provisioning. So right here, we want our workflow we just created. So I simply type joiner, and then it will suggest the joiner workflow. And we also need a portal form, service portal form, and we take the UD joiner. Okay, and finally, we need to assign catalogs. So that defines who will be able to order those services. And we will pick DE-IT for the German IT, for the German users. And we will also take US IT for the US users. Okay, so it's now assigned to both catalogs here. And then we click on Done. And now we just need to test if everything works fine. So I will open the console with this user, Maria Miller. I click on Catalog, go to Services Security, the category we added it to. Here we go. And now we have our form, so we can type Joe user and add our purchase to the cart and place order. The user can check the cart progress. It's provisioned. Let's see what happened when we go to the service catalog section here. It should create a task for HR. Yep, here it is. Add user to HR system. Last name is user. Please add Joe user to HR system. Looks good. Let's see if the Active Directory account has been created. Okay, we got user here. This is the Joe user we created. To analyze if the workflow finished successfully, we can also use the UI. So we can go to Administration, Services and Processes, Workflow Instances, and then we click on the workflow, which is currently suspended, and we can do a so-called visual tracking. So load the Workflow Studio in tracking mode. And we can check where is. So for example, we can also see the variables that have been used for the PowerShell, and now it's waiting for the activity. This is a wait for the task up here. So when we go back to our service catalog, and we close this task for HR, the workflow will automatically continue. So when we click on refresh, the workflow is completely finished. The end user who ordered the service also gets a status here. So the end user can now accept the delivery of the new joiner.